Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in the complete works of Plato, translated by Joette. We're going to take a look at the Apology, which is going to be pages 27 to 55, and it's Plato's defense at his trial. Let's go to block 1 and begin with the introduction. In the spirit of defiance. The apology is given in a spirit of defiance, a triumph in weakness, a presentation of ideal truth. An ideal truth in 3 parts. First is the defense, then a short elaboration on the penalty of death, and then a prophetic rebuke and exhortation. First, the defense. Public opinion says that Socrates is an evildoer, making the worse appear better. The accusers say he is a corrupter of youth and does not honor the state gods, that he teaches new divinities. So, first, answering the charges. He has a peculiar mission to detect and to negate false wisdom. This created enemies. And then the charge that he corrupted the youth. He has taught only virtue and self-improvement, never taking a fee, never taking a reward, always speaking the truth. Concerning the penalty of death. Death is preferred over the Athenian manner of life, and unrighteousness has already overtaken his accusers. He will journey to another world in the afterlife. And then third, rebuke and exhortation. State gods are unimportant when compared to self-examination and the principles of truth and right. Improvement of his fellow citizen has always been his guiding principle. He will become the first martyr of philosophy. So we can tell in the introduction that the Apology is a 3-part exhortation by Socrates as recorded by Plato. It is a defense in 3 parts. So in block 2 we're going to look at the first part, the defense, and then block 3 we're going to take a look at the second and the third part. So just keep that in mind. It is the defense, then an exhortation about death, and then the rebuke and exhortation as closing arguments. Let's go to block 2. The original text begins now, the defense, justice of his cause. The accusers have not spoken the truth. Socrates says, "You shall hear the whole truth from me, and the justice of my cause." First, he answers the accusation from popular opinion. They accuse him out of envy, and they accuse him that he makes the worse appear better. They profess wisdom, but they are not wise, says Socrates. My mission has been to detect false wisdom and to negate false wisdom. Because God only is wise, says Socrates. God only is wise. The wisdom of a man is nothing. He says his ministry is dedicated to God, to detect false wisdom. These accusers are accusing all true philosophers, not just him. The accusers are against all true philosophers. His mission is to detect false wisdom, and it has created a prejudice against him. He says, I must answer the second class of accusers as well, the accusation that I corrupt the youth. So the answer to the accusation that he corrupts the youth, he says, I do believe in spiritual agencies. I am not an atheist. God has ordered my philosophical mission. I do not teach new divinities. So he says he is not an atheist. He does believe in God, and he feels commissioned by God to teach virtue and to teach wisdom and to teach self-examination. He feels like that is a philosophical mission commissioned to him by God, a divine commission. So that takes us on to the second and third part of the apology, the words concerning the death sentence and the exhortation of the closing argument. Death response. Block 3, Note 1. Socrates is not grieved at the vote of condemnation. He has never lived for wealth, never lived for power. He has sought to do the greatest good. His teaching was on self-examination, virtue, and wisdom, never intentionally wronging anyone. He has always been engaged in a discourse on virtue. And he says, because the unexamined life is not worth living. That's a famous quote from Socrates by Plato. The unexamined life is not worth living. And then we close out with a final exhortation. He says, I am not far from death already. He's already 70 years old. He says, unrighteousness is worse than death. You are hereby condemned to truth. He says the accusers are condemned because they're condemned to the judgment of truth. In the hour of death, men are prophetic. So his closing exhortation is a prophetic exhortation. Your evil will eventually be censured. I interpret this judgment against me as good. My death is good, because my soul will migrate to another world. To die is gain. Doesn't that sound like the Apostle Paul? To die is gain. I am released from trouble. And then he says, I reprove you for not caring about that which you should care. They care about wealth, they care about prestige, they care about power. They should care about self-examination. A self-examined life is not worth living, says Socrates, as quoted by Plato. And the apology is, overall, it is a three-part exhortation on the self-examined life. That's the subtitle it could be given. A three-part exhortation on the imperative of the self-examined life. So just as a quick recap, let's go to block 1, and we'd have to definitely look at note 2 because it gives us the outline. The apology is in three parts. First, the defense. Second, a short elaboration on the penalty of death. Third, prophetic rebuke and exhortation. So that's what we take away from block 1, the outline given to us in block 1, note 2. Now block 2, we'd have to say that probably 4 and 5. The accusation that he faces is really against all true philosophers. His mission has been to detect false wisdom, and that has created a prejudice against him. And then note 5, he answers the accusation that he corrupts the youth. He does believe in spiritual agencies. He is not an atheist. God has commissioned his philosophical mission. And he says, I do not teach new divinities. In fact, my ministry has been commissioned by God. That is his conviction. And then block 3, I think basically we'd want to go to note 2, the final exhortation, where he says that unrighteousness is worse than death. And that he interprets death as good because he believes in the immortality of the soul, and his soul will migrate to another world. To die is gain. To die is gain. Very much what we hear from the Apostle Paul later. So it gives us a good recap. We have the outline in block 1, note 2. Then we have his answers to the accusations in block 2, note 4 and 5. And then the final exhortation is in Block 3, Note 2, where he tells us, as we discovered in a previous study in the Phaedo, that he has had a very firm conviction in the immortality of the soul. And he believed that his soul would migrate to another world, therefore to die is gain. To die is gain. So, it's a very powerful apology. It's very short. It's only like 30 pages, but in those 30 pages, he gives us a great exhortation on the necessity of living a self-examined life. He taught three things: self-examination, virtue, and wisdom. Self-examination, which includes virtue and wisdom. That was his teaching. He says, that was my discourse on virtue. It included self-examination, virtue, and wisdom. And it's to nourish the soul because he prioritizes the soul, and he believes in the immortality of the soul, and he believes that he has been commissioned by God for this ministry, a philosophical ministry. Excellent apology, very well known in Plato, the Apology of Socrates, pages 27 to 55. And next time, we're going to take a look at the Crito. That'll be 55 to 72. It's going to be relatively short, but it's only like 20 pages. We're going to look at the Crito next, beginning on page 55. That's going to wrap up the Apology of Socrates by Plato, pages 27 to 55.